Well, earlier today, I took 3 passionate debaters to the Apartheid Museum here in Johannesburg. Well, the choice of venue, of course, a very deliberate one. I began by asking author Eusebius Mkhize, as well as rights activists Ernst Roots and Andile Mngxitama, to give me their take of the events of the past week that were sparked by that tweet by one Penny Sparrow.
This is very normal. South Africa is an anti-black racist country, and I think what has shifted is something in the black psyche. Black people are no longer willing to accept to be insulted without responding to the insults. But to say it's new or it's isolated cases is to misunderstand South Africa, is to misdiagnose what this country is about. This country was built on racism. 1652, when white people arrived here, the first thing they did is to take our land and turn us into slaves and workers and servants for themselves. And that created the two, if you like, complexes. A superiority complex for white people and an inferiority complex for black people. In 1994, we did not resolve that matter. So institutionally, at the level of power, you have racism, which takes care of the interests of white people and gives them arrogance. And if you look with naked eyes, South Africa remains divided. Black people are in their townships, in their squatter camps. White people are in the suburbs. This is true with the economic structure, including land ownership. 22 years later, nothing has changed. So, no, this is not an aberration. It is, in fact, what South Africa is.
Adams?
Well, I think I've experienced in the past already that Andile has a very selective memory when it comes to history, and that he only picks those aspects that he feels will strengthen his argument.
Kind of arrogance.
But I can use the same argument that he used. I can use to say South Africa is an anti-white country. I don't believe this is a new thing. It's very unfortunate what we saw the last few weeks on social media, and it must be condemned in the strongest possible terms. But for us, it's been something that's been plaguing us as an organization for several years. We had, for example, this Chris Hart tweet, which I think is very debatable whether that's racist or not. But then we have, there's this outcry saying he's a racist because he said there's an entitlement problem. But the people responding to his tweet are saying to him, we're going to murder all the white people, or we're going to come and kill your family to teach you a lesson. But there's not the same type of outcry. So our experience is we must condemn all forms of racism. And from AfriForum side, we have condemned some of the tweets and things that we have seen on social media, purported by white people. But we sometimes get the impression that we're the only organization or institution criticizing or condemning white racism as well as black racism. So I think the only way to move forward is to really look at it collectively, and not simply to paint a picture where only one group is right and the other group is incorrect.
Mkhize?
I'm just flabbergasted by Ernst, quite frankly, who's obviously flying over the sparrow's nest. If he thinks that Andile is selected from history, I think that he is not even selecting from history at all, let alone badly selecting from history. The truth is exactly what Andile said. It's not up for debate. South Africa is founded on colonialism, not just apartheid. The anti-black racism that Andile rightly talks about actually goes much longer into our history than even the arrival of the Nats on the political scene. And so in the year 2016, we live in a country that is saturated with racism, institutional racism, systemic racism, racism in all our social spaces, interpersonal racism. What is deeply troubling about the situation is that just last night and again this morning in a press statement, we hear from the presidency that apparently racism is no big deal, fewer than 5 private individuals are racist, and we hear from a spokesperson from the presidency the bizarre view that institutional racism was crushed in 1994. So on the one hand, you have the ANC government living in cloud cuckoo land, and on the other hand, you have people like Ernst here believing that the volumes of racism against white people are morally equivalent and in volume the same level as racism against black people. So you've got to ask yourself, if you're an ordinary black South African citizen, where do you look to? You've got white people who are unrepentant about their racism, and you have an ANC government that is in denial about the country that it is governing.
You see, just to clarify, you're saying that morally, am I understanding you correctly, when you made the moral remark, that black people have a bigger moral standing to be racist than white people, or what do you mean with that?
No, I'm saying in the first instance, any South African who come onto TV who wants to have a conversation about white people being victims of racism are in the same position as a man coming onto TV and wanting to have an urgent national conversation about sexism against men. You are just utterly misplaced. In theory, women can be sexist. In theory, black people are capable of racism. Andile and I disagree slightly on that conceptually, but the reality is that the actual victims empirically of racism in this country and globally are black people. So when I see a phenotypical white man like yourself coming on TV wanting to prioritize the experiences of white people that are minuscule, it tells me a lot about how ahistorical you are, exactly the accusation you were leveling against Andile.
I think we're wasting a lot of time listening to voices of beneficiaries of racism who, if we're serious as black people in this country and we're a black majority, we should not listen to at all. White people have an incapacity to understand the race question because they're beneficiaries. This man and his family benefited from land theft of black people.
Where?
I mean, all white people, the land they have is stolen land. Now, we are not going to have a conversation with land thieves. You don't discuss with thieves. You get justice, you get land back. And this is what we must go to. I think it's a fundamental difference between myself and Eusebius on this question. Black people cannot be racist. We're not dealing with a theoretical postulation. We're dealing with a real historical context which has happened here, which is continuing to happen. White people have the power. They got that power from colonialism, from land theft, from violence. Black people are dispossessed, and therefore we need justice. And continuing with racism, as we see in the past 20 years, means that white arrogance continues. So blacks can't be racist, we're victims of racism. In the same way, I accept women are victims of sexism. We can't come around and say, oh, this woman is being sexist. She might have sexist ideas. She has no power to be sexist. She is a victim of sexism. So I think we must be clear. And it's a big mistake if we don't do this. Black people cannot be racist. We have no capacity to be racist. We are victims of racism. Let's correct that. And we cannot correct that with listening to white racists. It's a shocking thing that on a national television we actually give airtime to racists. These people should be locked up, in fact.
But I think he has a right to be heard.
No racists have any right to be heard. In the same way that you don't see, precisely my point. We have white arrogance. Because it comes from white power, and that comes from colonialism and land theft. Until we solve that problem, we're going to have so many individual acts of racism, including being insulted every single day by white people, because they have this institutional power.
Aaron, I want you to just make your case. Make your case for what you believe has led us to where things are at the moment, including saying whether or not you acknowledge that history, at the very least, led us to where we are today.
I'll do that, but just briefly, I think the worst form of racism possible is if you argue that your race is so superior that you are somehow excluded from the very definition of racism. And that's why, and I know people sometimes get very angry that when we use the term black privilege, and it's only in response to the white privilege debate. If a white person made the same type of comments about black people that this man is making about white people, he would not have any platform or any podium at all. But Andile has the privilege to be racist, and he has these platforms to speak about these podiums, to speak from podiums like this.
You hear?
No, well, I'm not saying the type of things that he's saying about. I'm not saying about black people what he's saying about white people. I'm trying to solve the problem. He's just bashing at white people.
You stole land. You still have our land 20 years later.
I think what brought us here, the question you asked is, I think there is racial friction, and I think it's worsening, but there were maybe interpretations or different expectations about democracy. Where white people were told during the negotiations of the early 90s that democracy will be good for you because white people or minorities' rights are protected. You know, democracy, you can be a minority and you can continue with your lifestyle. But at the same time, it was told to black people, democracy would be good for you because we're going to give back to you what you want, what you believe is yours. And in the end of the process, everyone was frustrated, or everyone felt that democracy didn't meet up to what their needs were. Now, I'm not saying the problem has been bad. I'm not saying democracy is the problem. I'm saying the expectations that were created about democracy is the problem. And we need to find that balance between democracy, yes, it's about governance by the majority, but democracy also, there's a difference between democracy and majoritarianism. The difference is mainly that democracy is about upholding the rule of law, about respecting different peoples, different communities, and also about protecting minority rights. I'm not saying minorities should run the country, but their rights must be protected in the process.
Okay. Can we cut through the nonsense there, please?
Okay, just before you do that, we're going to take a quick ad break, and when we come back, I'm going to give you space to do right there. But I also want us to answer that question. Can black people be racist? That's after this short ad break. Welcome back. You're watching on The Record. If we may just pick up from where we left off, gentlemen. You wanted to make a point before I go to the issue I want us to discuss in this particular segment. I'm
going to be greedy and tackle both questions and start with the one that you went to the break with. I no longer enjoy the debate about whether black people can be racist. I've written about it in my first book, A Bunch in My Bathroom. Angel has written about it. We disagree on it. The reason why I don't like the question is that I find it distracting. I think that we need to educate folks like the president who don't understand institutional racism, what it is. I think we need to try and drill into the heads of people like Aaron's who the true victims of racism in this country are in terms of the most volume of racism. And we need to have a conversation about what are the right interventions. So when we have this philosophical debate, which I'd rather have with black people alone, having a drink in Braamfontein, far away from the maddening crowd, we distract from what is the salient question here. Seeing as you asked the question, I personally think black people can be racist, but for quirky philosophical reasons that don't help us politically as black people when we're having this kind of national conversation.
But I think they do, though. I think
that it's a humanizing to say that black people are incapable of doing wrong. The reason I don't want to have the conversation with you on TV and with Angela is that it's music to the ears of Aaron's when he hears my quirky philosophical exposition. I'd rather we ask, what is institutional racism, who are the victims, and what are the interventions?
But I mean, if it's a myth, for argument's sake, then we do have a responsibility to debunk myths, isn't it?
We do for intellectual honesty's sake, but right now the most urgent questions in this country in 2016 are material. What are we going to do to make sure that millions of black people who are not flourishing because of colonialism's legacy will flourish from the moment we switch off our TVs tonight? That is the urgent question. Settling the theoretical or philosophical quirky question, can victims of oppression be also oppressors in the same language as the people who victimize them, is neither here nor there. I think you will find that people who hold the view that blacks can't be racist, I'm not saying, as Aaron's is implying, that black people are virtuous. They just want to couch those forms of wrongdoing in different language so that you're faithful to the history of anti-black racism. So for example, we don't want to predict what Angela might say, but I'm sure Angela would agree that black people are capable, for example, of prejudice, but that it's low in volume and that it's a response to oppression. But I think focusing on that entire question helps this man to not have to worry about what he's going to do about his unearned white privilege.
Adams?
Wow. I think that it goes back to your previous question, is what's the problem? I think part of the problem is that the narratives in this country are so far apart. And with all due respect, and I don't mean it disrespectful in any way, but I honestly find it laughable that we can have a discussion about whether black people can be racist. I mean, that's ludicrous. Racism is if you hate another person or if you inflict ill will towards another person. But the level of debate in this country has strayed so far from a sane debate that we are now saying, no, black people can't be racist. I mean, that is absolutely ludicrous. And it is something that we need to address. And what I find also disturbing is that we have this gross inconsistencies in the way that we deal with racism. We find, for example, that when I confront Eusebius about an incident where a black person said something about hating white people or killing white people, then he would say, yes, but that's an individual case and don't try to generalize it. But if it's the other way around, if it's a white person saying something racist, it's used as proofs. You see, white people are racist because look at what that white person said on Twitter. So there's these gross inconsistencies, and it's hard to take the debate seriously if people are not able to be frank and honest.
But if we are not being frank and honest, and I'm going to, with all due respect, start with you. What can be a sane debate, or where can we get a sane debate if you refuse to even acknowledge that history has had or given you advantages, and that is not even a departure point for you? Even a mere acknowledgement doesn't exist. I mean, in the minutes that we've had this discussion, you wouldn't even go there.
No, I can acknowledge that history has given me certain advantages. But once again, I don't ascribe to this gross generalization saying, if you are white, then you are privileged. Or if you are white, I don't think people who keep bashing about white privilege are not able I haven't heard any one of these people explaining what's the difference between privilege and achievement. So apparently, if a white person, and I knew you would laugh. I knew you would laugh.
Of course, because what you're saying is laughable. I'll give you a straight example. White privilege is when you phone up the estate agent and she doesn't doubt your bona fides for coming to look at the property because you have a nice thick Afrikaans accent. Do you want to call that achievement?
I have so much respect for you that I will not interrupt you while you are talking.
How about answering the question?
Let's let him speak.
Is it an achievement or is it privilege? That you are not doubted based on your accent and based on your skin color. You can have all the time you want.
I wouldn't know. I don't know that particular example that you are referring to. If I can make my point. If a white person excels, if a white person drives a BMW, for example, it's immediately, by these two gentlemen on both sides of me, it is accepted, or the conclusion is immediately, look, white privilege. There's not even a question of whether that person has worked for that. There's not even a question of whether that person's parents might have had trouble with him growing up, or whether there might have been socioeconomic troubles. The conclusion is immediately white privilege. And on the other way around, when a black person excels, there's no, and there's a complaint about, for example, BEE helping that person or so forth, that's also dismissed. So once again, we have this gross double standards, and the way the debate is moving is, in our view, so far from a normal debate that it's hard to take the debate seriously. So we can just continue with what we are doing as AfriForum, and the debate can continue, but we can't take it seriously because we can't have an open discussion about it. I think the first step that we need to do is everybody should at least be able to acknowledge where their communities that they represent or their institutions can also wrong, but as I said, can also make incorrect statements or can also err in the way they act. But as I said at the beginning, I really get the impression AfriForum is the only organization speaking out against white racism as well as black racism.
No, I mean, we need to describe the problem correctly, and that is a deeply philosophical question, Eusebius. If we miss that, then we are not going to solve the problem. In fact, we're going to simply make it worse for black people. The conceptual commitment to the idea that blacks can't be racist is an understanding of a historical reality that has evolved in this country, which has to do with a systemic question, including laws which were passed, which deliberately excluded and oppressed black people, privileged white people, which means that our society as it stands today is from that process. As a result, black people need reparations, need redress, need to actually not just acknowledgement, but get back that which was taken from them. So if you have a conceptual understanding of racism, which is so elastic to mean everybody can be racist, what you do there, you undercut the possibility of white people, of black people in particular, to claim reparations. So just like it should happen, the Holocaust affected Jewish people. You're not going to go there and say anti-Semitism includes everybody. No, it's a specific group of people who were oppressed under specific conditions. And racism described the oppression of black people by white people. In our case, particularly through land theft. So black people cannot be racist. And there is no possibility in South Africa to make a genuine ethical conclusion that any white achievement is outside of white privilege. Because everything starts from where you got things wrong. You stole from us. You oppressed us and our land.
Where?
And that's why we are in the township, we're in squatter camps. That is why in South Africa today, 35,000 white families own more than 80% of the land. All that land is stolen land. Unless we address the land question, and it's not just for material reasons. Addressing the land question will also deal with the psychological questions of exclusion, and in particular, his sense of superiority, and we must not pay a cent. That is the only way I believe we can start dealing with this question. Otherwise, we're going to waste a lot of time listening to beneficiaries of apartheid. It's unfortunate, it's an insult. No normal society would allow it, except here.
Good, gentlemen, we're going to take another quick ad break, and when we come back, I want us to tackle the question, where to from now? What do we do? You know, even if we disagree to a point where we're saying there is no point in debating at all, as you have suggested, that's after this short ad break. Welcome back, and if you've just joined us, we're watching On the Record, a new program that goes beyond headlines to tackle some of the most pertinent issues affecting or that South Africans are talking about at this particular moment. And this evening, we're talking about the issue of racism following the events of the past week. If I may start with you, Andile, this time around. Where to from here? What do we do as South Africans to deal with these problems, and whether, irrespective of the vantage points each one of us is coming from?
The first thing is to accept the responsibility of ending racism lies with the black majority. It is a problem we do not create, but which we must alone resolve, because we are the victims of racism. White people quite clearly over and over again have shown that they are incapable of understanding racism because they are beneficiaries. That's the first thing that we have to understand. It's our problem, which we did not create. We must solve it. And for us, it comes, first thing that must be done is to return land. There is no resolution of the racist question in this country without addressing the land question, because it has a material and a psychological positive benefits. And we must, of course, think about outlawing racism, this idea of decriminalization of racism. But if we do that outside of dealing with the institutional power that comes with the land question, and we don't accept the principle of blacks can't be racist, if you decriminalize without accepting that principle of blacks can't be racist, you're going to end up locking up black people. And this is my biggest fear.
If you do what Andile is suggesting, so we're going to end up being the laughing stock of the world, having a law saying if a white person is racist, we're going to throw you in jail, but if a black person is racist, it's okay. I mean, that is so ridiculous. I can't even imagine how a person can argue like that. I think if we're looking at solutions, unfortunately, as much as I would like to do that, I can't really do something to solve, or I can do very little, I believe, to solve racism within the black community or hatred within the black community towards the white community. I think Andile can do more in that regard. But I believe I can do maybe more to address racism within the white community or hatred within the white community. So the solution would be to turn to your constituency, and when your own supporters are being racist, or when you see people saying racist things or doing things that are bad for this country, then you can address them, especially if those people will take you seriously. But I know Andile has never done that, and I don't think he ever will. So he ever will.
I'm just going to come take the land. That's my thing.
You see, because his entire premise is based on...
That's it.
What Andile is saying is that if we did not... I'm assuming that, I'm concluding that from what you're saying, is that if we did not have apartheid in South Africa, black people would have been rich. And I'm not saying black people would necessarily have lived in poverty.
Don't worry about what will happen to us. We just want the land back. We'll solve the problem. But don't worry about what we think and psychoanalyze us.
Yeah,
you're a land thief. You're a beneficiary of
where have I stolen
land thief. And in fact, you should not be part of this conversation.
Which land have I...
People like you should be locked up. You are lucky that, in fact, it's coming to that point.
That's black privilege. You can say these type of things, but I can't say that about you. We are so angry.
We're going to deal with every one of you who goes on like that. And I'm very happy. We will say, don't worry. We are very prepared and ready to deal with individual acts of racism and institutional racism. Yes. And we're going to shut people like you up.
Let's allow Aaron to finish his point.
He's threatening me on television. And I find it offensive, I really do. But once again, it comes back to this debate where this gentleman believes
racist must not be allowed to speak.
It's not possible for a black person to be racist. So we will never solve the racism debate as long as one side of the debate is saying, listen, we can't do anything wrong. You are the only ones who can do something wrong.
You have done something wrong already. You are denial about it.
And you have not done it.
You have already done something wrong.
Okay, are you serious? What should we be doing instead of...
Jeez, I mean, I don't know where to start. The amount of nonsense we've heard from Aaron tonight is both offensive and also good material for any debate coaches out there how to reason fallaciously. It's my turn to speak. A couple of things. Firstly, as Achille Mbembe said in a beautiful piece in City Press yesterday by the lovely title, The Year of the Monkey, we need to make sure that the cost of racism in the year 2016 is so large that we either drive racists away or they leave the country. For example, it must cost you your job. Mrs. de Klerk now knows that. Penny Sparrow now knows that. An intern at a radio station found that out on Sunday night. Professionally, it must damage you. It must also damage you in the eye of your peers. Your boyfriend must be ashamed, as happened at this event in Cape Town, or your girlfriend, whatever the case might be. There must be material and social and professional consequences. And that is why we have suddenly found that companies are realizing, unless they also become vigilant about how their brand is smudged, when they have racism in them, that they will not last, because in a time of social media, we are all publishers. We don't have to wait for a TV station to decide to go after the racist. But that is at the interpersonal level, where Andile and I absolutely agree, and I refuse to prioritize our area of disagreement because it's less important politically. Where we do agree, Andile, is that institutionally, unless you deal with the institutional injustices in South Africa, in the economy, in corporate South Africa, in our higher education system, politically even, dare I say it, now that the ANC leadership has shown itself willing to cast, to pretend that racism isn't a thing in this country. Unless you deal with the structures of racism, you will never be able to deal it a fatal blow. And I don't think that it's only black people who need to deal with racism. We need white people to do it as well. But on a parting shot, I want to say to Aaron, it's not good enough to say, I'm willing to speak to white people in my organization or in my community. That's my bit I will do for dealing with racism. I'm afraid your track record is what we will look at to examine whether or not you've achieved that. It's like me saying, I am a feminist, and then I go home, and then I beat up my wife. Your actions speak louder than your words. If you can't acknowledge that you are a beneficiary of colonialism and of racism, if you don't get what Andile means when he says that even if you didn't directly steal land, you are the beneficiary of unjust or regional acquisition of land by white people. If all of those things pass you by, don't pretend that you're an ally in the fight against racism. You're not. You're the problem.
I can't take you seriously when you can't differentiate between privilege and achievement. If you can do
you don't
that,
take any black people seriously, so I'm no exception.
No, that's not. Yes, you see, that's the type of racism that we as white people experience in this country. If you can't differentiate between privilege and achievement, you believe there's no such thing as achievement, and you assume all white people are privileged, everything that white people have is because somewhere they stole something, don't expect of white people to take you seriously. And I know you don't need white people to take you seriously, but don't expect that. I can't take you seriously because you are grossly inconsistent in the way you approach this entire race debate, where if a white person says something racist, it's posted everywhere, and we also condemn it. But if a black person says, you know what, we need to kill all the white people, it's sort of just glossed over. So that's the type of debate that we have.
Well, I've not seen a criminal accepting that they are criminals. I've never seen a thief saying they're accepting that they are thieves. In fact, it's so interesting, this white denialism, that even here where we are, the Apartheid Museum, this concept was stolen from black people, by the way. So the white denialism, it's your thing, but I understand it.
And does black denialism exist?
All thieves, criminals never admit to their wrongdoing. Therefore, we're wasting time as black people, as victims of your crimes, for us to engage you. For what? We must just go and take our stuff. And then we will have a good society, we'll deal with racism.
Gentlemen, I'm going to give each one of you a minute, literally 1 minute, to make concluding remarks. But answering also the question, what happens if we don't deal with this question in the manner that each and every one of you has suggested we do? Andile?
Well, if we don't deal with racism, this country is going to fall apart completely. And in fact, some of us actually are waiting for that moment to happen. Because decolonization cannot be this kind of exchanges with beneficiaries of colonialism. Let's be honest, but this is about black people. If black people don't understand that it is our responsibility, we'll never get very far. Our government has abandoned this question. 15 years later, after the World Conference Against Racism, where all governments, including our own government, was told and it accepted that it will bring about a national action plan against racism, we don't have an action plan against racism. The talk today of criminalization of racism, outside of understanding the institutional questions and the principle of blacks can be racist, is the most dangerous thing that can happen to us.
I think the debate about racism is not balanced. I mean, here we are sitting one white person, two black people in the Apartheid Museum discussing racism. So that in itself already is not balanced. And I think if we can't have a balanced approach,
Well, we're assuming that black people are homogeneous.
No, they aren't. I'm not assuming that. I'm not assuming that at all.
But this man represents a tiny minority in society anyway.
The problem in this country, I think part of the reason why racism is a problem is because of the big education crisis that we have. And once again, I think for us it's hard to take people seriously when they complain about white racism, when they're not prepared to acknowledge the education crisis. 80% of our schools in this country are dysfunctional. And the majority of those schools are black schools. White people have access to better schools. The only way, and that eventually leads to white people being more qualified, being more able to achieve in the labor market. And then there's racism or there's racial friction. We're not going to solve racism if we're not going to fix the education system. But if you don't want to fix the education system, but you want to be angry at white people, I can't take you seriously.
one of the features of whiteness is narcissism. And narcissism is when 4 men are in a circle and one white man complains that his 25% representativity is not enough, even though if you look at the demographics, he's actually a one-digit part of the population. Such is the hegemony that is being used too discursively. 2 final points by way of closing. Firstly, what is at stake is simple. The entire democratic project. Nothing less, nothing more. And finally, on this question of achievement versus merit, I think we need another self-standing discussion on that. But if you have white people with single-digit unemployment in this country, you have black youth in this country with unemployment over 40%. If achievement alone explains white economic power, as Aaron's would have us believe this evening, then it means that black people are either lazy or stupid, which probably are beliefs that he secretly harbors.
Gentlemen, that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you very much for taking part in this discussion. Hopefully, this discussion will go on and on until we find real and practical solutions that take our country forward. That's where we're going to leave this particular discussion. With that, the end of our first debate. Well, we'll leave you on this section of the program with the words from Nelson Mandela. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite.